clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Aye. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Aye. Mr. Graham.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
Yes.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley.
No.
Mr. Cotton.
No, by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Yes, by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 16, the nays are 5.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Adil Mangi, nominated to the Third Circuit. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on his nomination?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cruz, Senator Cruz, I'll take you first, and then Senator Lee and Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have deep concerns about this nominee, and I would note we have talked at length in this committee about the nature of Joe Biden's judicial nominees. He is consistently seeking people who are extreme, who are partisans, and who are out of the mainstream. Today, we are voting on several judges whose records, quite frankly, are extraordinary. And it is consistently disappointing that no matter what a judge has done, a judicial nominee has done, no matter how extreme their record, the Democrats on this committee will vote in favor of those nominees. Mr. Mangi served for years on the Board of Advisors of a radical and anti-Semitic law center at Rutgers. It was called the Center for Security, Race, and Rights. That center hosted an event on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, challenging the, quote, narrative regarding that gruesome terror attack. The existing narrative concerning 9/11, to the extent that there is one, is that vicious terrorists launched a cowardly attack and killed thousands of American civilians. Call me crazy, I don't think that's a narrative that needs to be rethought. It's pretty accurate in terms of what happened, but apparently the center did not think so. The panel of speakers at the event included, firstly, an actual terrorist. I'm not joking. Sami al-Aryan, who in 2006 was convicted of conspiracy to contribute services or benefits to a terrorist organization, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, spoke on this 9/11 panel. The panel also featured Hatem Bazian, who explicitly called for intifada in the United States. That's not rumor or innuendo, it's on video, and it's undisputed. Is that a mainstream position? Apparently Senate Democrats think it is. To have another October 7th here in the United States. Are my Democratic colleagues okay with this? Or do they simply believe the press will not report anything, no matter how extreme these nominees are, so they can be safe? This event also featured Professor Rabab Abdul-Hadi, who had hosted her own events in San Francisco, ones that platformed and featured an actual terrorist and plane hijacker, Leila Khaled. Mr. Mangi, who was on the advisory board of this center, while all of this was transpiring. Now, if this were just a single isolated event, maybe it would be a different story. But instead, the opposite is true. This sort of radical political programming was at the very core of this organization Mr. Mangi was involved in. In May of 2021, the center held an event called, quote, the 100 Years War on Palestine Teach-In. A Jewish news syndicate opinion piece entitled, quote, Hamas apologists slander Israel at Rutgers Teach-In, described the event as, quote, terrorist whitewashing webinar. Among other things, speakers at the event explained that, quote, Israel has succeeded in painting Palestinian resistance as terror. Understand the Democrat senators on this committee are perfectly fine with that. They don't have a problem with that at all because they're getting ready to vote for a judge who served on the advisory board and saw event after event after event and didn't see anything he disagreed with because he kept serving there. On September 2022, the center held another event entitled, quote, Consistent Partiality, U.S. Foreign Policy on Palestine, Israel. One of the speakers, Peter Beinart, stated, quote, there's a deep identification among many conservative white American Christians with Israel, and it partly comes from the fact that Israel, like the United States, is a settler colonial state. The Democrats on this committee agree with that? Apparently they're willing to vote for judges that do. On May 29th, 2021, the director of the center, Professor Sahar Aziz, signed a letter which was posted on the center's website, which read, quote, a ceasefire does not end the colonial conditions of structural violence and inequality that Palestinians live under. The letter went on, quote, the Palestinian rights to freedom, security in their homes, to return, self-determination, and to be free of violent occupation are well established under international law. The language of both-sidedness, of timeless or religious conflict with moments of escalation erases the military, economic, media, and diplomatic power that Israel, an occupying force, has over Palestine. The most shocking part of this statement reads, quote, we are in awe of the Palestinian struggle to resist violent occupation, removal, and erasure, and the expansion of Israeli settler colonialism. Well, after October 7th, are Senate Democrats in awe of that? We'll find out with their vote in a moment. I asked Mr. Mangi, did he agree with these statements? Specifically, did he agree or disagree with Professor Aziz? And I have to say his answer was reminiscent of Sergeant Schultz in Hogan's Heroes. I know nothing. Who's she again? I asked him, did he agree with Professor Aziz's statement, whether Israel was an occupying force in Palestine? And he refused to answer. He said, it was too complex. Let that sink in for a minute. I have to say, I kind of wondered if he was auditioning to be president of Harvard. He just needs context to know whether the Hamas terrorist or the IDF are more problematic. He had the opportunity to denounce this event, to denounce these statements, to denounce this center, and he didn't do it. He just said, no, I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. No, too complex. I have no idea. I have no views at all. He also tried to give this committee the impression that his connection with the center was extremely limited. What center? No, I was just on an advisory board. I don't know. I have no idea what they're doing. Mind you, look, it's possible, I don't know, but it's possible he didn't know about this event celebrating terrorists on 9/11. It's possible he didn't know about the event before it happened, but you know what he didn't do? He didn't resign after it happened. He didn't say, whoa, I didn't know this is what you guys were doing. Nope, he was perfectly fine. And by the way, they kept on doing these events over and over and over again. But he wasn't just on the advisory board. He was a donor. He gave $6,500 of his own money, wrote it to the center. But that's not it. He didn't just give his own money. He also went to his law firm, Patterson Belknap, to help get the center an additional $13,000. So nearly 20 grand. And mind you, what Mr. Mangi wants to tell this committee is, yeah, I helped raise nearly 20 grand. I gave $6,500 myself. I was on the advisory board, but you can't blame me for anything. And mind you, he could have done what some of Biden's nominees do, which is take their record and run away from it, denounce it, say I was mistaken, I was young. No, he didn't say any of that. Instead, he just said it's too complex, he can't give an opinion. He didn't denounce any of this. And by the way, who recruited Mr. Mangi to the center? That would be the director, Sahar Aziz, the same woman who described Israel as an occupying force, quote unquote, that engages in, quote, settler colonialism. The Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey has stated that Aziz, quote, regularly and consistently promoted vile anti-Semitic propaganda. The Senate Democrats agree with that, quote, vile anti-Semitic propaganda. Well, we're going to find out, and there's no surprise. Senate Democrats of the Russian Politburo, that's how you vote, no matter how extreme the nominee. I understand when your party's in power, it's expected that you vote for most of your president's judicial nominees. Many of us on the committee were here all 4 years Donald Trump was president. We had a number of nominees. I voted for most of those nominees. I understand that. I'm not expecting Democrats to suddenly start voting against a ton of Democrat nominees. But Joe Biden and this White House are seeking out radicals. And repeatedly, when President Trump made nominees who we deemed outside the mainstream, we said, no, that's not going to cut it. And we actually exercised advise and consent, the constitutional authority of the Senate. I do not understand why Senate Democrats believe they have no responsibility and why they're willing to rubber stamp these nominees, but I would urge every member of this committee to vote against this nomination.
Before recognizing another senator from the Republican side, I'd like to make a statement. It's been my honor to be on this committee for more than 2 decades. This is one of the best committees on Capitol Hill in terms of the opportunity to address issues of the moment and to make a difference in the selection of lifetime appointments for judicial nominations that will impact this country for years forward. I've sat through hundreds and hundreds of these nominations. Under President Biden, it's been close to 200 already. And in the past, like numbers in previous years. I will tell you what happened in this committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, on December the 13th, 2023, to this nominee is a new low in this committee, a new low. What is it about Adil Mangi that attracts such criticism? We know what the starting point is. He would be the first Muslim American to be appointed to serve on the circuit bench. That's an amazing honor. There are only 3 other Muslim American federal judges, and he would have the highest rank among them. And we know because of that he is a target for things that he's done in the past. But like every other nominee, he has to let his life work speak for itself and answer the questions of this committee. So what is this man, and why should we be concerned? You've just heard a presentation, a suggestion that because of his background, he is likely to be either anti-Semitic or a terrorist because he's a Muslim American. Anti-Semitic or a terrorist. He said things over and over again during the course of the hearing where he could not have possibly been twisted to say that he is anti-Semitic. But don't take my word for it, a partisan supporter of President Biden's nominee. Think of one Jewish organization in America that you might turn to ask, what do you think? Is this man's background or statements anti-Semitic? I think it might be the Anti-Defamation League, ADL. We all know them. They've been around a long, long time. Let me read the letter that they wrote to this committee and every member after the questioning, which you've just heard, and similar questions from other Republican nominees. As the leading anti-hate organization in the world, whose mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and treatment for all, ADL is compelled to speak out about the inappropriate and prejudicial treatment of Adil Abdul Mangi, a nominee for U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, during the Judiciary Committee hearing on December 13th, 2023. During his confirmation hearing, Mr. Mangi was subjected to aggressive questioning unrelated to his professional expertise or qualifications. Rather, he was forced to provide responses to a wide range of inquiries regarding his views on global strategic considerations in a manner that inappropriately politicized these issues and raised serious questions about pretext and bias. The ADL goes on to report as follows. Just as associating Jewish Americans with certain views or beliefs regarding Israeli government actions would be deemed anti-Semitic, berating the first American Muslim federal appellate judicial nominee with endless questions that appear to have been motivated by bias toward his religions is profoundly wrong. Hate, bias, and bigotry have no place in government, especially in the hallowed halls of Congress. When nominees approach a congressional hearing, their religion, heritage, race, gender, or any other protected identity characteristic should not be the subject for political fodder. This was an attempt to create controversy where it does not exist, the ADL writes. ADL urges leaders to refrain from fueling discrimination and hate and urges the Senate to offer Mr. Mangi a fair vote based on his qualifications and fitness. That wasn't the only Jewish organization. Scores of Jewish organizations have written to us complaining about the way he was treated and supporting his nominations. And here's what the American Jewish Committee said. Mr. Mangi, who would be the first American Muslim to serve in this role, affirmed his belief in Israel's right to exist, his abhorrence of terrorism and any justifications for it, and outright rejection of anti-Semitism from the American Jewish Committee. Let me also report, if I can, that at the end of his questioning by Senator Cruz, I asked Mr. Mangi if he would want to give a complete answer. Here is what he said about the incident involved, the event that has been highlighted over and over again. I'll answer your question very directly, Senator Cruz. I will condemn without equivocation any terrorism, any terrorist, or any act of terrorism, or any defense of any act of terrorism. And this event, I don't know this event, Mr. Mangi said. I don't know anything about this event or who these people are. I've never heard of them. If someone on there is a terrorist, I condemn them. He said that under oath unequivocally. Did you hear that in the response by Senator Cruz? You did not, I'm sure. And so it comes down to the bottom line. Do we have the courage to stand up and say this was wrong, the way this man's been treated? Do we have the courage to say that assuming that everyone of a Muslim faith in America is a suspect terrorist or anti-Semitic? I hope we do. Senator Lee?
Mr. Chairman, I deserve a right to respond to that.
Well, you'll decide that, but I'll decide Senator
Well,
Lee's
you've
right
impugned
next.
my character, and you made an accusation
I read
that
an
was a
ADL
vicious
letter.
lie. I'm going to quote from you what you said about me. You said that I had just asked a question, and here is a quote from you, Mr. Chairman, quote, that I had said he is likely to be anti-Semitic or a terrorist because he is Muslim. Now, you have just impugned my character by making a false accusation, and I will say it is disgraceful. Did you respond to any of the substance of what I said? No. You just attacked me and called me a bigot, and you responded by stating deliberate falsehoods. You said he would be the first Muslim. Well, you know what? I understand. Excuse me. I have a right to defend myself when you impugn my character in a way that is a new low for this committee. You did not dispute any of the facts I said about the organization, that he was an advisor of, he was a donor of, he raised money for. Instead, you said he'd be the first Muslim on the federal court. Well, no, that actually is not correct. And in fact, Mr. Chairman, in fact,
judge.
So the Democrats don't want to defend the substance, so now they're screaming Islamophobia. And I understand playing the race card when anyone disagrees with the Democrats, they scream
stand by
racist.
the ADL letter.
But
Senator Lee.
no, I'm going to defend myself because under the Senate rules, you have impugned my character in a way that is blatantly false. And let's just respond with facts, with substance, rather than invective. Just recently, Zahid Qureshi was nominated by President Biden, was confirmed by the Senate. Like Mangi, Qureshi is a Pakistani American. He's a Muslim. and he was nominated to serve the people of New Jersey. However, unlike Mangi, he doesn't have association with a radical anti-Semitic group. He doesn't have association with whitewashing terrorism. Rather, Schy served in the Army. He was deployed twice to Iraq. He worked for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and he served as a federal prosecutor. And he received 83 votes in the United States Senate for confirmation, the second most under Joe Biden, second only to a nominee from Texas, whom John Cornyn and I recommended. And so it is not the fact that Mr. Mangi is a Muslim that is his problem. It is the fact that his record is extreme. And by the way, if you want to look to Jewish organizations, the Zionist Organization of America has submitted a letter to this committee opposing the nomination. The Coalition for Jewish Values has submitted a letter to this committee opposing the nomination. Stop Anti-Semitism, a nonpartisan organization, has voiced their concerns with Mr. Mangi's affiliation. I want to introduce into the record, I ask unanimous consent to introduce into a record an article from the New York Post entitled, "Biden Judicial Nominee Draws Scrutiny Over Ties to Controversial 9/11 Memorial Event." I responded with substance and fact, and you responded with insults and invective that ignored the substance that Mr. Mangi deliberately associated with a consistently anti-Semitic organization, and yet Democrats are perfectly happy for him to be a federal judge.
I stand by the statement that I read into the record from ADL, and I also stand
My
by
quote
the
from you was not from ADL.
I stand by the record that I read it into the record, the statement from ADL, and I also stand by what was said under oath by Mr. Mangi after you finished trying to associate him with this organization, that he had no connection with it.
Did you just say he had no connection with this organization? Is that seriously what you said in this hearing? He was on the board of advisors, he was a donor and raised money for him, and you just said he has no connection with him?
See, you twist this situation.
Mr. Chairman, you just said he has no connection with this organization. Is that your view and the view of Senate Democrats?
Read his statement to you.
Is that your view, that he had no connection with this organization?
Senator Lee.
Okay, you're refusing to answer because it's obviously indefensible and false.
Senator Lee.
Mr. Mangi,
Senator Cornyn, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe when Senator Cruz asked unanimous consent that a document be made part of the record, there was an opportunity for you to.
Without objection.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure that was.
Senator Booker will close the debate on this now. Oh, I'm sorry, did you want to speak?
I'll be brief.
Sure.
I think it's clear that the objection to Mr. Mangi is not because of who he is, but what he's done. And his refusal to acknowledge the facts of his record. That's not the sort of candor that you would expect or that we deserve when it comes to exercising our advice and consent responsibilities under the Constitution. And I am really struck by the fact that here we are about 100 days after the worst terrorist attack against Israel in its history. I was just in Israel last week with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Ossoff was there, among others. And I mean, this is like our 9/11. They're still traumatized, as you might imagine, by what happened to innocent men, women, and children, including the one-year-old hostage that I mentioned a moment ago that was featured in today's Wall Street Journal. So I think it's profoundly unfair to suggest that opposition to Mr. Mangi is because he's a Muslim. As Senator Cruz pointed out, we voted overwhelmingly to approve a judge who is a Muslim by an overwhelming vote as to the District Court in New Jersey. I just don't think you can square the argument that the objection to Mr. Mangi is because he's a Muslim, when in fact we overwhelmingly have confirmed a Muslim judge to the District Court in New Jersey. And I think it really, frankly, represents a new low for the committee to accuse a member of the committee for being somehow prejudiced against somebody because of their religion, when in fact it's clear that the objection is not to Mr. Mangi for who he is or his religious beliefs, but rather what he has done. And thank you for giving me the chance to say a few words.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley.
Mr. Chairman, I was not going to say anything because I asked quite a few questions of Mr. Mangi, and so I thought I had made my views clear. But I have to say, after you, a moment ago, not only read that letter to the record, which you're perfectly entitled to do, but before you did that, you said that those of us who had questioned Mr. Mangi on that day took this committee to a new low. Oh, yes, you did.
I didn't name names.
You didn't name names. You said those of us who questioned him took it to a new low.
Some did.
And that would be those of us on this side. And I did question him on that day, and frankly, I resent the insinuation that those of us who asked him questions are somehow anti-Muslim or prejudiced in some way. I think it's outrageous. I think it's absolutely outrageous. And frankly, as someone who has worked across the aisle on any number of pieces of legislation, you know, Mr. Mangi, supported by my friend Senator Booker, that is certainly a major point in his favor. And it's been a delight to work with Senator Booker on pieces of legislation in this committee and with you, Mr. Chairman. But I have to say, it's hard to do when you call us anti-Muslim racists, which is basically what you just did a moment ago. It's on video. Everybody can see it. I mean, truly, that is absolutely outrageous. And so I'll just reiterate again, my issue with Mr. Mangi is I don't care what his religion is or if he has a religion. I don't care. But I do care that he was the director of a center that was basically a mouthpiece for Hamas. And he said over and over all his concerns were academic. My question is, did he not have concern about Jewish students? We've seen Jewish students barricaded in libraries after October 7th, barricaded in libraries, fearing for their lives. Did he not think that a center which actively promotes genocidal rhetoric might have some effect on the students he was supposed to be helping? I think that's a legitimate set of questions. Now, we could disagree on it. Clearly, we do. And I say again, I respect the support that he has from Senator Booker and others. That's fine. But I think in light of the events of October 7th, not just overseas, but in this country, and in light of what Jewish Americans have suffered in this country, in my own state, in the state of Missouri, in the city of St. Louis, we've had Jewish businesses spray painted with anti-Semitic, the worst sort of anti-Semitic slogans, graffiti, swastikas. We have Jewish students in our campuses in Missouri on the WashU campus say they feel unsafe. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask a gentleman who advised a center on campus that has spouted this kind of propaganda why he was associated with them. So I just take strong exception to that, Mr. Chairman, and I have to say, I wish you'd retract your remarks because I think they were totally inappropriate.
I stand by the statement submitted to this committee by the ADL. The last person to speak will be Senator Booker.
Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Yoon. Now we'll ask the members of the committee to consider asking questions of the nominees, and I'll start that. Mr. Ali, my advice to most young people who think they might someday want to be a judge is don't put anything in writing, because the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to read it and draw their conclusions as to who you really, really are. We have had some nominees who have produced poetry, which some members of the committee have judged proof positive that they are Marxist. So I'm prepared for almost any conclusion. You've submitted numerous amicus briefs over the course of your career as a litigator, and on some of those briefs you've been joined by organizations from across the political spectrum, including the Cato Institute. Speak about some of the issues you've worked on that seem to bring together unusual political allies, as well as why you think these issues are so important.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to that part of my advocacy. And that has been in a role as advocate, which I understand is fundamentally different than the role I've been nominated here for today. I am, in my role as an advocate, really proud of the work we've been able to do to build bridges and build coalitions on issues mostly related to government accountability. And as you noted, Senator, it's been with organizations like the Cato Institute. It's been with the support and working closely with law enforcement organizations. It's been with organizations, even the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Second Amendment Foundation, and other organizations that people sometimes would be surprised to know could come together and argue in favor of a more just system in that advocacy.
Judge Harjani, you were one of the lead trial counsels in U.S. versus Kosia, which was the first case in this country to prosecute a trader for commodity spoofing and flash trading. It is not uncommon for members of the committee to query nominees about points of law and areas of law. And I would hate to be tested on the issue of commodity spoofing. But since this was a case in your background, could you describe it to this committee?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I had the great privilege while being an assistant United States attorney to do the first trial prosecution involving flash trading or spoofing, which is essentially a commodities fraud scheme whereby individual traders will input trades that are not meant to be executed, that are meant to be canceled in order to dupe other traders from putting in orders and trading. And as a result, the schemer is taking the opposite side of the trade. So they push prices up, they make a profit. If they push prices down, they make a profit. And it essentially is a way to play with the markets and to play with supply and demand in an illegal way, because it's done not to execute trades, but to trick others. I was very grateful to be a trial lawyer in that case, received convictions on all counts against the defendant, and a sentence of imprisonment. And as you've noted, Senator, I've devoted my life to protecting victims of investment fraud. I have felt very strongly that victims need their day in court, their voices need to be heard, and that is the duty of prosecutors to protect them. And that was my career before I joined the bench, and I'm very grateful to have that opportunity. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Yoon, members often question nominees based on their background as to whether they come with a bias toward defense, a bias toward prosecution. In the course of your practice, you've worked on both sides, both tables. Tell me a little bit about the issue of bias and why those who appear before you, should you become district court judge, which I believe you will, can feel that they have a chance.
Thank you for the opportunity, Senator. In my career, I had the great privilege of working both ends of the aisle, being a defense attorney as well as a federal prosecutor. I've also worked in the areas of both civil and criminal law. If you look at my record, you will see that I have always served my clients fairly and impartially and was a zealous advocate for all of them. With that, I also understand the great responsibility of our judges to be fair and impartial and make decisions without fear or favor. Should I be so fortunate to be confirmed, I will look to my vast experience in both areas and will make sure that anyone who comes before me in the courtroom will have a fair shake. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. I see ranking member has arrived.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. Senator Graham, if you'd like to make an opening remark or ask questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also would like to thank our senators working with the White House to get these nominees through the committee. I appreciate that very much. Today, President Biden's going to the border. Former President Trump's going to the border. I think we all know why they're going to the border. The border is an absolute national security nightmare. Senator Cornyn's from Texas. He knows it probably better than anybody else, Senator Cruz. So just for a few minutes here, the bipartisan bill on the supplemental, the immigration bill, appreciate the effort, a lot of good things in it. We had one cloture vote, then we moved on to the aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. What's been missing, Mr. Chairman, is a committee-driven process to try to find common ground to see if we can move the ball forward on a broken immigration system. In 2008, I believe it was, 13, I can't remember, I've been so many of these bills, the Gang of Eight, whenever that was, we had markup in committee, dozens, probably hundreds of amendments, a couple of weeks on the floor. I voted for the product. So did you. I stand behind that product. But the point is, we had a chance for this committee to kind of lead the Senate on immigration. We produced a product and went to the floor, and it was amended heavily. I would recommend we try to do that. The president's current and former president are going to the border for a reason. On May 15th, 2023, the House passed H.R. 2. It's been over here with no action for a very long time. So I would urge you, Mr. Chairman, to take that bill or the Senate bipartisan bill or any bill you'd like, bring it to the committee, and let's have a debate within the committee to see if we can pass something on immigration and send it to the floor and allow our colleagues to have a say so that we can kind of go back to the normal way of doing business in terms of trying to fix an immigration problem. And maybe the best example lately of why we need to do something is the death of Miss Laken Riley, beautiful young lady at the University of Georgia who was killed jogging, and everyone is presumed innocent in this country until proven otherwise. But the person being charged with her horrible death came to this country illegally and was paroled. Now, again, that person's entitled to a fair trial. We'll see what the system in Georgia does. But we do know this. We do know the person who's been charged with that crime came over in 2022 illegally at the border and received parole. What I want is an analysis of his case. Here's the law. The DHS Secretary may, on a temporary basis, as conditions may warrant, on a case-by-case basis, parole people in the United States based on two factors: urgent humanitarian reason, significant public benefit. So the gentleman that was charged with his murder, he was paroled. Secretary Mayorkas told me at an appropriations hearing, if I have his testimony, I'll enter it in the record, ask him, when somebody's paroled, is there an individual analysis required by law performed on each case? And he said yes. So what I want, and I hope the committee will back me up here, is an analysis in this case. What were the factors that led to him being paroled? Is there a written record? Is there an analysis that we can look at? I think you owe it, quite frankly, to the country. I wrote a letter to DHS that I will submit to the record. I'm expecting an answer. I think the family of Ms. Riley certainly deserves an answer. I think everybody in the country certainly deserves an answer. So our parole system was addressed in the bipartisan bill, but not in a way that was sufficient in my view. I, along with others, tried to make sure that DHS granted parole on a case-by-case basis with an individual analysis. Here's where we stand on parole in the Biden administration. $795,000 people paroled in FY22, 802,764 paroled in FY23. In calendar year 23, I think it was 997,000 people. How does that compare with past presidents? During the Obama-Trump presidencies, the average number of people paroled into the United States per year was 5,623. The average for President Biden is 795,561. What's going on here? The law is being ignored, is being abused. The bipartisan bill did not address this. There needs to be a mandate from Congress reinforcing to DHS, stop blanket parole of people from Venezuela, Cuba, and other countries. You're violating the law. There's a court case in Texas about this. So I'll introduce into the record my letter to Secretary Mayorkas asking him about the information regarding the person charged with Ms. Riley's death. what were the factors considered to grant him parole in 2022. And I would urge this committee, after the visit by President Trump and Biden, current and former president, to take up some legislation as a base bill. It can be anything you would like, and see if the committee can find some common ground, report it to the floor of the Senate, and try to do something if we can. So, Mr. Chairman, the country is really in a crisis. There's enough fentanyl come across our border last year to kill everybody in the country. In the last 3 years, there's been enough fentanyl to come across our southern border to kill 5 billion people. There's been over 200 people come across the border on the terrorist watch list. The carnage related to a broken border is unbelievable. The leading cause of death of young people in this country is fentanyl poisoning coming across a broken southern border, mostly manufactured in China. I don't know how many people have to die. I don't know how much longer this has to go before we engage in a process that can get a result. I appreciate the bipartisan negotiations. It took months. It was done behind closed doors. It's now time to have an open debate about how to fix a broken immigration system to try to save some lives if we can, and show the country that we can work together to fix a problem that I think deserves a solution. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I hope you will join me in insisting that DHS, Secretary Mayorkas, provide us information about why and how this individual was paroled. Thank you.
Let me say at the outset that in terms of this horrible case involving the person who was killed, we will, of course, make available to every member of the committee access to that information that helps them understand the case. We have to draw the line short of interfering in the prosecution of this case, and I'm sure the senator from South Carolina agrees with that. Let me also say that the senator from South Carolina made it crystal clear months ago, that there would be no defense supplemental bill without addressing border security. He was adamant in his request, and his request was certainly timely. The situation at the border demands a response from Washington and Congress. And as a result of his position, making it known here on Capitol Hill and across the country, there was established a bipartisan group to write a bill on border security. The Republicans insisted, and rightly so, that they wanted their own spokesman on that group, James Lankford of Oklahoma. I know James Lankford personally. I think all of us do, and respect him. He is a principled individual. We may disagree on issues politically, but I do believe he is an honest man and would be an honest broker in this process. Kyrsten Sinema joined in that, as well as Senator Murphy from Connecticut. And they put in not only hours, but days and weeks, perhaps months of effort to come up with a border security bill, and they did. I didn't like some provisions of it, but I understood that in this world we live in, compromise is an essential element to success. And we may have a majority in the Senate here, nominal majority. We still face a filibuster threat, even with that nominal majority. And so the border security bill was offered for the Senate to consider, a bipartisan approach, which I believe would have made positive strides towards dealing with many of the issues that the senator from South Carolina has just raised. We know what happened next. Donald Trump announced that he didn't want this bill to go forward. He went on to say, and explicitly quoted said, "Blame it on me if the bill fails. I'm going to blame it on him." The decision not to even negotiate a bipartisan bill, but to stop cold in its tracks, is an edict from former president, which some people think very highly of. I don't. I think that bipartisanship, compromise, and attempt to make some progress is part of why we're here. So at this point, the senator from South Carolina says, let's have a hearing and a markup in this committee. Is Donald Trump going to rule that markup too and decide what comes out, if anything? I don't know the answer to that. But why in the world would we walk away from this bipartisan border security bill that has a chance of passage Why isn't that the standard that we move on in terms of dealing with this unsustainable situation at the border? I'm willing to endorse that effort publicly as I have before because I think it's the right starting point. I respect James Lankford. I hope we all do for the effort that he put into this on behalf of the Republican side. So we have more to say, I'm sure, in the days ahead about the border security situation.
I know Senator Leaf, if I could just have a second here to respond. I want to get on with the markup, but this is important in this regard. Senator Durbin, we have worked together to produce products that pass the Senate, fail. I know how frustrating that is. The bipartisan bill had many good things. I want to compliment Senator Lankford and Sinema and Murphy. I was actually part of the group trying to find a way to put something together. I never envisioned that we would have one cloture vote and move on to the defense supplemental. It was clear to me sort of the fix was in from a leadership point of view. The parole provisions in that bill were insufficient to deal with the problem we have. And here's the sad thing. The problem is self-inflicted. President Biden could stop all this by just following the law. And he's chosen not to. Most of the things we need to fix in the short term were self-inflicted. Remain in Mexico was a policy that you had to wait in Mexico until your asylum hearing that could be 4 or 5 years away. Well, people didn't pay. They stopped paying thousands of dollars to sit in Mexico for 4 or 5 years. I went to the border like 2 weeks ago with Senator Schy. If you go, and I recommend you go, I think we should all go to Ukraine. I think we should all go to the border. The Border Patrol will tell you, and I'm sure Senator Cornyn will echo this, that 2 things could be done really quickly. Basically, deport some people so people will stop coming if they see people leaving, and go back to remain in Mexico. That would stop 70% literally overnight. Those 2 things can be done without any law being passed. As to trying to find a solution, I didn't think one cloture vote would be the end of the debate. It certainly wasn't in the past. As to President Trump, he believes we can wait. I don't. I'll gladly have him mark up here. I think we need to do something as soon as we can, but we got to actually address the core issues here. And I was told by Senator Lankford, when it comes to doing away with blanket parole, that's a non-starter. 30,000 people a month to parole from 4 countries under the current system without any individual basis. I'd like to have a chance to do something about that problem. If you don't, you're not going to fix the problem. So I'll end where I began. Let's use the committee like we've done in the past. Let's try something new and different. As to whether President Trump would support the product, I don't know. But I know this, the committee's a pretty capable group. If we can find some common ground here among this crowd, then I think you got something to work with.
So, Senator, I'm more than happy to answer. I'm trying to resolve in my mind these 2 issues of abortion and IVF. I understand the premise. If you start with the premise that life begins at conception, then it certainly is reasonable, I suppose, to follow that through to the conclusion that no abortion is warranted and to want to overturn Roe versus Wade, which is what one group of thinkers in this country arrived at. But then for the same people to say, well, I'm all right with IVF, seems to me to be inconsistent. Because we know during the IVF procedure, we run the risk, if not the reality, that there will be embryos created that will not be implanted. So is this the end of a life? How can you reconcile those 2 positions? I find it difficult, very difficult. Professor Sneed said we're going through a work in progress since Dobbs. It sure is a work in progress. So when you hear Dr. Denard and others misheard describe what they've been through. But it's a work in progress that I think is fundamentally ignoring the obvious. Ms. Rivera, this notion of personhood, how would you describe it?
Thank you for your question, Senator. I think you're absolutely right. these reproductive health issues do not exist in silos. And the problem is that if you define fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses as legal persons with independent rights, it's going to affect everyone. It's going to affect abortion, it's going to affect access to IVF, it's going to affect contraception, and it's going to affect the quality of health care that pregnant women and pregnant people are entitled to. So you're absolutely right.
So they wanted to overturn Roe versus Wade to take away the right of a woman to decide to end her pregnancy. Now there are some who want to outlaw IVF and deny a woman the right to start a pregnancy. The common notion here is the woman is just a vessel, is not a participant in this decision-making process, either for her own health or the future of her own family. Dr. Denard, is that what you discovered?
Thank you so much for bringing this up. When I was pregnant in my state, I felt exactly how you described. I felt like a vessel. And when I looked up at that ultrasound screen and saw that I was growing a pregnancy that had no skull or brain, but had no way of making any decision on my health, it's exactly how I felt. And that's exactly how my patients feel when they are in similar situations. We have lost our ability to make any decisions about our bodies, and it's harming women, and it's harming families.
There was a report on National Public Radio just yesterday that, quote, said the dangerous disruption of the standard of care for pregnancy in the state of Louisiana in wake of the Louisiana abortion ban. The story noted that women in that state have been forced to undergo cesarean section when their water breaks early in pregnancy, before the fetus is viable, instead of receiving an abortion procedure or a medication, which is standard medical practice. One doctor explained the C-section was done to, quote, preserve the appearance of not doing an abortion. And even more galling, the patients aren't even given a choice. As I understand it, a C-section is much more serious and not a safe procedure as ordinary vaginal abortion. Equally troubling, the NPR story reports that OBGYNs in Louisiana are now delaying routine prenatal care until patients reach 12 weeks, a serious deviation from standard medical practice. Can you speak to how these restrictive abortion bans affect the ability of OBGYNs to practice a standard of care that you learned in medical school?
Thank you for this question. At this point in my state, I feel like Ken Paxton himself is standing in each and every one of my office rooms when I see patients, because now individuals are having to change the way that they practice medicine. Individuals are having to change the way that they counsel patients due to all of the fear that has paralyzed our care. So much so that women who are living in Texas and other states where abortion bans exist, their lives are at stake, and they are not receiving the same medical care that individuals are in states where the restrictions are not so severe. There are so many rippling effects of this. There have been migration of physicians to different states. Patients have been abandoned in certain states because of this, and we're losing physicians that have the ability to do procedures, including abortion care, because of these restrictions.
Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Member for cooperating in today's markup a little early to avoid conflict with the joint session. We have a long agenda today, including several nominees who've been listed for the first time and will be held over, as is the custom of the committee. They are Judge Nancy Maldonado, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, Georgia Alexakis, U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois, Krissa Lanham, U.S. District Court for the District of Arizona, Judge Angela Martinez, U.S. District Court for the District of Arizona, Sparkle Suknanen, U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, Judge Claria Horn-Boom, another term on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, Judge John Gleason, another term on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, Matthew Gannon, to be U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Iowa, David Waterman, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, and Gary Grimes, Marshal for the Western District of Arkansas. There's also one bill on the agenda to be held over, S 1306, the Cops Reauthorization Act. We'll also vote on 4 judicial nominees and 2 U.S. Marshals. We're hoping to go to the joint session soon. I now turn to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we get to the judges, next week we're supposed to have an impeachment trial of Homeland Secretary, DHS Secretary Mayorkas. He was impeached by the House for failing to do his duties, and it's up to the Senate to do its duty. But apparently what we're going to do is do a motion to table the impeachment process. I don't think he's even been given a summons, and we're going to short-circuit the Senate trial in a way that's never been done in 200-something years. I think there have been 21 people impeached from the House since the late 1797. All of them have had a disposal in the Senate by some form of trial, except one who resigned. But the Democratic majority is going to abandon that. We're not even going to have any debate about the articles. Y'all have decided, for some reason, just to make a motion to table to end it before it starts, which violates every tradition of the Senate. I think it's constitutionally wrong. Just another example of taking the Senate and turning it upside down to get what you want. In 2013, Senator Schumer and Reid started the idea you don't need anything but a simple majority for circuit court judges. That set in motion where we are today on the judiciary. There is just a majority required, that came to head when we were in charge, and Gorsuch was filibustered. So the Senate's rule, longstanding rule about getting 60 votes, has been abandoned. It started in 2013. Everybody on this committee has voted to change the rules of the Senate to do away with the legislative filibuster, making us the House. Now you're going to take the impeachment process and turn it upside down because you just want to get on with it. You don't want to have a trial about whether or not our border is broken to the extent that the man most recently, most directly in charge should be impeached. Bad day for the Senate, just a continuation of the wrecking ball approach y'all have taken to the institution for political purposes. And we may avoid a trial, but you're not going to avoid the issue. The American public, I hope, in November will hold you and the Biden administration accountable for obliterating our border, for allowing it to be chaos on steroids, for creating a situation where smugglers not only are bringing human individuals in from all over the world, they're also facilitating ISIS. I've never seen a situation at the southern border like this. We're at all-time high of illegal crossings. The terrorist threat to this nation is off the charts. We're on pace, if this continues, to have 3.6 million encounters every year. And December was the highest December in the history of the country. And this doesn't count the gotaways that Senator Cornyn talks about all the time. To say it's chaos is just really not justice. It's criminal, really. What you've allowed to happen is a violation of any sense of responsibility by Secretary Mayorkas to protect our country. He's in charge of Homeland Security. And this is what the FBI director said. While there have been many times over the years where individual threats could have been higher here or there, I've never seen a time where all the threats, or so many of the threats, are all elevated at exactly the same time. And so we have a trial pending in the Senate about whether or not the man in charge of the border should be impeached, and we're going to do a table to motion, a motion to table. We won't even talk about the substance of the articles. We won't even summons the guy. We're short-circuiting the process. The first time in 200-something years we've done this, and you're avoiding a discussion about the most important topic I think many Americans are facing. One of the reasons that I think he was impeached, he has absolutely abused the law on parole. Parole is required an individual analysis. 2 factors would allow you to be paroled into the country: unique humanitarian need or some unique ability you have that would help the country. During the Obama-Trump years, 5,600 people on average were paroled in the country. In FY22, 795,000. I think Mayorkas is violating the statute. I don't believe him when he says you do an individual analysis. Laken Riley, the individual that was paroled in, I don't believe for 1 minute they did an individual analysis on why he merited parole. I've asked for his case file. I haven't gotten anything. The reason I haven't gotten anything, I don't think there's anything to give me, and they just don't want to admit it. So, pretty bad day for the Senate. This will be the norm, I guess. You know, President Trump was impeached twice. I'm not asking you to agree with the impeachment of the House. I'm asking you to follow the constitutional process that's been set up for 200 and something years. When President Trump was impeached twice, we went through the process. People got to argue about the articles, people got to present evidence, and the trial was disposed of, but here. So I want the American people to know, when it comes to evaluating whether or not Secretary Mayorkas should be impeached, we don't have a chance to do that. We're not even going to get to debate the articles. We're not going to produce any evidence. We're not have any debate about whether this is legitimate. It is going to be stopped before it starts. This is a quasi-judicial hearing. Never in the history of the Senate has this been done, to table the articles of impeachment before the person impeached has even been served. This takes us down the wrong road. It's the first time ever, and unfortunately it probably won't be the last. So the impeachment process now is a victim to the Democratic Party's efforts to get results no matter what the law requires. Very sad.
Immigration is an issue that's subject matter of this committee, and most of us understand that the only progress that's been made on it, even in conversation, is on a bipartisan basis. That's why many of us held out great hope for the Lankford effort, which was asked for by the Republican side. Unfortunately, presidential candidate Donald Trump stepped in and said, I don't want that to go forward. I'd rather have the issue in November, and you can blame me for it. I'm blaming him for it. First is Judge Sanket Bolara, nominated to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York. Does anyone wish to speak about this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Sarono.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Judge Dina Cogins, nominated to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of California. Does anyone seek recognition on this nomination?
Mr. Chair, just briefly,
Senator Butler.
this is my first judge that I had the opportunity, a nominee that had the opportunity to work with from the beginning of her process. She has an outstanding career and incredibly deep and meaningful litigation experience. I think she'll be a wonderful addition to our federal judiciary, and I appreciate my colleagues' support of her nomination.
Thank you, Senator Butler. If no one else seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Sarono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. The next nominee is Eric Schulte, U.S. District Court for the District of South Dakota. Does anyone seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Judge Camilla Taylor, U.S. District Court for the District of South Dakota. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, may I
Senator
ask that my
Cornyn?
vote be changed from no to aye?
That's, the
Thank
record
you.
will so reflect.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 20, the nays are 1.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. The next nominee is David Barnett, U.S. Marshal for the District of New Mexico. Does anyone seek recognition on this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
No by present.
No by present.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. And finally, we have Clinton Fuches, U.S. Marshal for the District of Maryland. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Visit, it would certainly be worth our while. Under the early arrival rule, Senator Blackburn, you're recognized next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And, you know, many of us do visit prisons. And one of the things that repeatedly comes up is the number of repeat offenders and how difficult soft-on-crime policies have made it on our local law enforcement agencies in the judicial system, and also the effect of fentanyl on communities. When you look at those that are incarcerated, the number that are there because of drugs and mental health issues, those are issues we should be doing a deeper dive on. And Senator Graham mentioned how he was surprised we were taking our time today to talk about solitary confinement when we should be talking about H.R. 2, a border security bill. Number one issue with the American people right now is what is happening with that open border. Every town's a border town. Every state is a border state because of the effects of the Biden open border policy. It is all intentional. It is what they wanted. And it's what our colleagues across the aisle continue to support. Fentanyl racing into this country. We should be looking at that, Mr. Chairman. None of us want that in our communities. Look at the number of children that are being exploited by cartels that are trafficking children, and they're being trafficked into labor gangs. They're being sexually exploited. These are things that are happening, and I wish that we were putting our time into that. Now, back when I was in the House in 2007, I introduced a bill, the CLEAR Act, and it would take some of those provisions from the 287G program and give authority to local law enforcement. When they apprehend somebody that is in the country illegally, they can hold them. And then ICE has to come and ICE has to deport them and then reimburse that local law enforcement agency for what they have spent. So, Sheriff, I want to come to you and thank you to each of you for being here today. I appreciate it. I would like to get your thoughts on legislation like the CLEAR Act that would empower local law enforcement and then have ICE deport these criminal illegal aliens and reimburse local law enforcement for what they have spent and deny federal law enforcement funds to jurisdictions that will not comply with federal immigration law.
Senator, what you're talking about is not something new or revolutionary. We had that at one time. If I remember right, it was somewhere around
287G.
Well, even before then, even before 287G, in the 1980s and 1990s, we had officers at the Victoria Police Department who were dual commissioned as U.S. Customs agents and local police officers. And they had the authorities that you're talking about. And so the restitution of those authorities is something that can be looked at by federal authorities. And so I think that we all have to work together and do our part, because this open border that we're facing right now and the surge of transnational criminal activity is overwhelming us. I heard one of the senators early say that most of the fentanyl is being brought in by United States citizens, and that is not correct. If you lived down on the border like I am, then what you'll find is that is being brought here by transnational criminal organizations. Some of the people that work for cartels do live in the United States, but that product is being shipped here by cartel members from Mexico into the United States. They no longer are dependent on China for the precursors to make fentanyl. They have now figured out how to make it themselves. Those individuals in Mexico are some of the smartest people you'll ever meet, and they will figure out exactly what to do in order to generate a profit. And I think that we need to look at the ability to deny transnational criminal activity and organizations any ability to make profit within the United States, because I don't know if any of you have ever sat down with a Sicario before. I have on multiple occasions. When you talk about solitary confinement, as it's being called here, we call it separation in the state of Texas. Those people have to remain in separation or they will kill somebody. It's not like the movie. They're not professionals. They're sloppy and they're mean. And we have to deal with them in a manner that protects not only our correction officers, but also the fellow inmates that are in the facility, because It doesn't matter if you're a jailer or an inmate, you're made in the image of God, and I have to protect you no matter what.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator, in previous stage of the hearing, we had a similar request that we deal with legislation that addresses border issues. And I, for one, would like to remember that it was Senator Langford's effort that resulted in a bipartisan bill, which many of us actively supported.
Mr. Chairman, as we know, that was not a border security bill. It was an immigration bill, and H.R. 2, which is a border security bill, landed in this committee last May. Last May, the first part of May.
Let me just say, Senator.
We should have a hearing on that, whether we like it or not.
Senator.
Let's take it up and let's debate it and look at what has transpired at this border. I talk to parents every single week who have had a child impacted by fentanyl, and people that are seeing some of these labor gangs. I am terribly concerned about these 85,000 children that HHS and DHS can't find.
Well, we can go into all of these issues, and we have in the past. But I will tell you that the bipartisan effort by Senator Langford, the chosen representative of the Senate Republicans, along with Senator Murphy and Senator Sinema, was the first bipartisan effort that moved us towards 60 votes, which is essential for passage in the Senate.
And it couldn't get where it
four
needed to go.
Four Republicans, after they told us
It was
point
not
blank,
a border security
well,
bill.
I tell you, you're wrong.
And I want, well,
You're wrong,
no, sir,
Senator.
I am not wrong
And
on
HR
that. It
2
was an
received no
immigration
Democratic
bill.
votes. I don't want to go down these rabbit holes of
The American
partisan-
people are expecting us to do it. That's why they want a trial
Well,
on Mayorkas. And I think it is so wrong that Chuck
giving me-
Schumer
you're
is
gi-
trying to table
I can't
this.
keep up with all the issues you're throwing at me, Senator. We came today to talk about solitary confinement in federal prisons, and I hope we can get back to that subject. At this point, served in a variety of roles within the office and as appellate chief. He personally wrote more than 200 briefs and argued 37 federal appeals. After receiving blue slips from both Tennessee senators, Mr. Ritz was confirmed by the Senate to be U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee by a voice vote in September of 2022. In that role, he serves as the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for the 22 counties of the district and supervises the other attorneys in the office. As U.S. Attorney, Mr. Ritz created the National Security and Civil Rights Unit within the criminal division of his office. He also regularly meets with and convenes law enforcement and community partners to discuss violent crime reduction efforts and other priorities. I congratulate Mr. Ritz and his family on his nomination and look forward to hearing his testimony today. Senator Blackburn is asked to make remarks, and I now recognize her for 3 minutes. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by saying just how disappointed I am that the Biden administration has once again shown little regard for the long-standing bipartisan tradition of consulting home state senators on judicial nominees. Senator Hagerty and I attempted to work in good faith with the administration. We identified highly qualified nominees to fill this vacancy, but unfortunately, the White House had other plans. It is abundantly clear that despite the White House assurances to the contrary, there was a backroom deal to appoint Mr. Ritz to this vacancy from the very start. But the most glaring example of the White House outright refusal to consult is the fact that they have not even bothered to ask what our objections to Mr. Ritz might be. Had they done so, I would have explained my serious concerns about his professional ethics, concerns that should alarm those in the White House pushing his nomination, and concerns that we have heard from many of his peers. In our country, every individual accused of a crime is entitled to due process under the law. That is a bedrock principle of justice. But that's not how Mr. Ritz has operated as a prosecutor. Mr. Ritz has been accused of using highly unethical bait-and-switch tactics to trick indigent criminal defendants into accepting plea deals they didn't agree to. And when defense attorneys pushed back, Mr. Ritz has been accused of making outright false statements to the court to cover up his misdeeds. Indeed, Mr. Ritz has chosen to surround himself with those who seemingly treat their ethical obligations with disdain. Mr. Ritz's deputy, for example, received a 1-year probation for prosecutorial misconduct. We have heard from many of his peers and colleagues. You don't have to take my word for it. Just ask Stephen Shankman, the former federal public defender for the Western District of Tennessee. Mr. Ritz has such a reputation for unethical behavior that when Mr. Shankman first heard reports of a prosecutor behaving unethically, he knew it had to be Kevin Ritz. Writing about Mr. Ritz, Mr. Shankman said, and I quote, "This is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred, but everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware, your clients should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution," end quote. You should proceed with extreme caution. What an admonition. Is that how the American citizen should be made to feel if they were to go into a courtroom with the presiding judge being Kevin Ritz? With an ethical record like this, I question how the ABA could give him any rating other than not qualified. He has no business representing the United States in a courtroom, let alone presiding as a judge with a lifetime appointment. But Mr. Ritz's record of unethical behavior isn't my only objection. Under his watch, as the chief federal law enforcement officer, the city of Memphis has become the most dangerous place to live in the United States. That is a fact. In 2023, Memphis had the most homicides in its history, and data shows that 2024 homicides are going to outpace 2023. Law and order has completely collapsed in Memphis under his leadership, and there is no more tragic example than last week's murder of a Memphis police officer. Officer Joseph McKinney was shot and killed on Friday by a criminal who had been arrested just weeks prior for 4 felonies, including unlawful possession of a weapon and possession of an illegal Glock switch. Make no mistake, the criminal would not have been out on the streets but for Mr. Ritz falling asleep at the wheel. His inaction has cost lives. Prior to Mr. Ritz's tenure, the U.S. Attorney's Office had a policy of charging 100% of prosecutable gun crimes. Why Mr. Ritz did not follow through on this, I do not understand. But we do know a police officer, a father, and a Memphian, they are dead because of Mr. Ritz's lack of leadership.
Senator, your time
Thank
has
you,
expired.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me say at the outset that Mr. Ritz will be before this committee for questions from all senators and have an opportunity to respond. Senator Blackburn asked for this special privilege of speaking out of turn, and I gave it to her and extended her time an additional 2 or 3 minutes in an effort to accommodate her in a fair fashion. Let me say at the outset, Mr. Ritz has been judged by the American Bar Association. To judge him and his prospective nomination, they contacted attorneys in the area as well as judges. Their conclusion, unanimously well qualified. Unanimously well qualified. If that sounds different than what you just heard, it is. Second, I want to address this notion that we have some kind of backroom deal here. The senator has been selective in talking about the facts that led to this nomination. Let me tell you the history. It takes a minute or two, but it's worth it. As many of you may know in this room, blue slips are literally blue slips of paper issued by this committee as a courtesy in order to seek input from colleagues on nominees from their home states. During the Obama administration, Senator Leahy chaired the committee and honored blue slips for both circuit and district court nominations. If a senator did not return a blue slip for a nomination from his state or her state, that individual nominee did not move forward. That was the tradition under Senator Leahy. As a result, Senate Republicans held multiple circuit seats open during the Obama administration that President Trump later filled. Both parties do that. But when Senate Democrats expressed reservations with President Trump's picks for circuit seats in their states, Senate Republicans reversed their thinking. They did away, the Republicans when they were in charge, did away with blue slips for circuit court vacancies and held hearings on 18 circuit court nominees who did not receive blue slips from their home state senators. I objected at the time, as did many of my colleagues, but we also repeatedly warned the Republicans were establishing new ground rules when it came to blue slips for circuit court judges. I've said it many times, there cannot be one set of rules for Republican nominees and another for Democratic nominees. So today and throughout this session, I am following the same standard the Senate Republicans set. Senate Republicans confirmed a nominee to the Third Circuit after the Trump White House refused to let Democratic home state senators even meet with him. Another Third Circuit nominee was informed that he would be nominated weeks before the Trump White House had a single conversation about the vacancy with Senator Casey of Pennsylvania. And the Trump White House counsel informed Senator Baldwin of Wisconsin during their very first conversation about a Seventh Circuit vacancy at the White House that they'd already selected a nominee without her knowledge. That doesn't seem like much consultation to me, but Senate Republicans said it was plenty. Given that history, the White House consulted with the Tennessee senators on this very vacancy, significantly more than precedent requires. The White House has been discussing this Senate seat with the Tennessee senators since August of 2023. They exchanged names of potential candidates in October of 2023. Mr. Ritz interviewed with members of the Tennessee senators' staffs in both October and November 2023. The White House counsel's office interviewed the Tennessee senators' suggested candidates in November of 2023. The White House then gave the Tennessee senators the opportunity to choose from 3 candidates, including Mr. Ritz. The Tennessee senators refused to do so. The White House also repeatedly offered the Tennessee senators the opportunity to interview Mr. Ritz. Senator Blackburn did not take them up on the offer until March of this year, and Senator Hagerty did not conduct an interview of Mr. Ritz until yesterday. My Democratic colleagues would have been grateful to receive such courtesy from the Trump White House. But what did Senator Blackburn offer instead? Calling this a backroom deal. Senators Blackburn and Hagerty may have preferred another individual for the vacancy, but consistent with precedents set by former Republican chairs of the committee, we will proceed with the hearing for Mr. Ritz. It's now time to call
Mr. Chairman, there are inaccuracies in your statement. I'll be happy to submit a timeline and the fact that on Christmas Eve we received an email that they were going to nominate Mr. Ritz, but I'll submit those in writing for you.
Thank you very much, Senator. First panel is Mr. Ritz, and will you please approach the table as they change the nameplates. Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Chairman, that really begs the question. The Constitution and the rules of the Senate require a trial. And what Senator Schumer proffered with a unanimous consent request was not a trial. It was some abbreviated debate on a motion to dismiss. So as the presiding officer acknowledged last night when I made a parliamentary inquiry, this sets a precedent in contrast to the requirements of the Senate rules and the Constitution, which would require a trial once the House votes on articles of impeachment and sends it to the Senate for a trial. This sets a new precedent. So what our Democratic colleagues have done is provided that if there is a future impeachment of a president of the United States let's say by a democratically controlled House, and it's sent to the Senate, that can be summarily disposed of without actually having a trial. That, to me, is a fundamental assault, really, on the institution of the Senate and on the Constitution and the Senate's rules.
We now turn to the votes before us. First is Judgeless Gretchen Carlson for being here today and inspiring a lot of the effort.
Speaking of ageless, I want to thank Senator Grassley for
what a comparison.
helping me get this thing moving. And he's had a midlife crisis. He's going to solve it right here in front of us, and we're going to get this bill over the line.
That is regular order for sure. We turn to the votes on nominations. The first is Kevin Ritz, nominated to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. I'd like to briefly comment on his nomination. During the hearing, members of the committee questioned him about a complaint submitted to the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility in connection with his representation of a case. Mr. Ritz has stated that he was not aware of the complaint, a fact he reiterated under repeated questioning by members of the committee. One member even went so far as to accuse Mr. Ritz of lying to the committee. As I mentioned yesterday, that would be a federal crime when you're under oath. No evidence was produced to suggest he was lying. In fact, this accusation was untrue, unfounded, and wholly inappropriate. Here are the facts, as Mr. Ritz explained at the hearing and as we followed up to find to be true. He did not receive notice from the Office of Professional Responsibility regarding any letter of complaint. This is presumably because OPR determined the complaint was meritless and dismissed it. As OPR itself says on its website, and I quote, "Most complaints received by OPR are determined not to warrant further review because, for example, the complaint on its face appears to be without merit or is unsupported by any evidence." This is the most important sentence. In such cases, OPR will close the matter without informing the subject attorney of the complaint. Notably, the defense attorney represented to the court during the case in question that she was not accusing Mr. Ritz of any misconduct. In fact, no allegations of misconduct against Mr. Ritz were ever substantiated. The judge in this case stated, and I quote, "The record does not reflect a determination by the court adverse in any way to Mr. Ritz. I need that to be absolutely clear," the judge said. Given these facts, the treatment of Mr. Ritz by some members of the committee was disappointing. His nomination to be U.S. Attorney was voice voted out of this committee in 2022. Notably, he enjoyed the strong support of his home state senators at the time. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Mr. Ritz's nomination?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you. And I'm not going to take up the committee's time today to rehash the White House's history of not working with Senator Haggerty and I on these judicial nominees. But I do want to say this. The White House rushed through a backroom deal to put Kevin Ritz in this seat. And by so doing, they have nominated a man whose lack of professional ethics unquestionably disqualifies him from federal judicial service. And for all of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who care about indigent criminal defendants, who care about preserving criminal defendants' constitutional rights, and who care about supporting our federal public defenders, you should be very concerned by the prospect of Mr. Ritz serving as a federal judge. I know that my Democratic colleagues believe in the American ideal that every individual accused of a crime is entitled to due process of the law. But that's not how Kevin Ritz operates as a prosecutor. Mr. Ritz uses bait-and-switch tactics to trick indigent criminal defendants into accepting plea deals they didn't agree to. He leaves his written plea agreements intentionally vague, lures indigent criminal defendants and public defenders into an oral agreement, and then pulls the rug out from under them in court. And when a female defense attorney finally called Mr. Ritz out on his unethical conduct, he tried to defame and discredit her. In fact, Mr. Ritz was removed from that case because of his unethical behavior. The prosecutor who replaced him went so far as to say on the record that the allegations of Mr. Ritz's professional conduct, and I quote, are serious and are taken so seriously by our office that Mr. Ritz will be taken off the case, end quote. And this wasn't just one case. Mr. Ritz's reputation for unethical behavior is well known across the Tennessee bar. Just ask Stephen Shankman, the former federal public defender for the Western District of Tennessee. Mr. Ritz's ethical misdeeds are so well known that when Mr. Shankman first heard reports of a prosecutor behaving unethically, he knew it had to be Kevin Ritz. In an email warning other defense attorneys about Mr. Ritz, Mr. Shankman said, and I quote, "This is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred, but everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware, your clients should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution," end quote. You should proceed with extreme caution. I'd like my colleagues across the aisle to think about that one. Is that how you want indigent criminal defendants and public defenders to feel when they enter an American courtroom and Mr. Ritz is the presiding judge? I would hope you do not want that. Mr. Ritz has a history, unfortunately, of lying to the federal courts, lying to federal public defenders, and lying to indigent criminal defendants. And during his confirmation hearing, Mr. Ritz lied to the committee. Mr. Chairman, I do not believe that Mr. Ritz has the judgment or professional ethics to be a federal judge. It is deeply, deeply disappointing to me. We had asked to work with the White House. We know what has transpired here, and I hope my colleagues across the aisle who are concerned about unethical federal prosecutors trampling on defendants' constitutional rights will join me in opposing this nomination.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Before recognizing Senator Tillis, I would like to make this point. The committee has received many letters of support for Ritz's nomination, including members of the defense bar in Tennessee. I want my colleagues to listen to this one sentence. One letter from the federal defender of the Western District of Tennessee said of Mr. Ritz, I quote, "a fair person of integrity," and notice his, quote, "perfect temperament to serve as a judicial officer." That comes from the federal defender in Western District of Tennessee. Another letter from a criminal defense attorney who served as opposing counsel in cases with Ritz described him as, quote, "intelligent, honest, hardworking, and fair." Before we make allegations of any witness before us lying to this committee, recall that they are under oath and that would involve possible criminal action. I would be very careful in using that term myself. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This morning.
Thank you.
Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tomorrow, I think we're going to vote on the immigration bill. One thing I would like to point out is that legislation is not required to do most of what needs to be done. It just requires will. So we're going to have a vote tomorrow, and it's just a vote to try to help your side politically on the border. I don't think it's going to work. The average number of people granted parole by the Trump administration and the Obama administration was about 6,000 a year. Now, what is parole? It's executive authority granted by statute that the executive, through the Secretary of Homeland Security, can parole people into the country on a limited basis based on a unique humanitarian need, somebody's mother's dying, or special benefit to the country, maybe a witness in a case. That was used about 6,000 times a year under the Trump-Obama administration. It has been incredibly abused. Since we last voted in February of this year on the bill that's going to be brought back up, 77,000 people have been paroled. There's not any change at all, and it's never going to change. So you could have demonstrated, the administration could have, taking this matter more seriously when brought up by our colleagues. Go back to the statute. You're abusing the statute. You're mass paroling people. You're waving them in. And we found that Mr. Vera, the man who's been indicted for killing the young woman in Georgia, was released through parole, not based on a humanitarian need or special benefit of the country, because El Paso was full. The man that's accused of killing Laken Riley was let go by DHS because they had no place to put him, and he was paroled. That's not a statutory requirement. I am never going to vote for immigration reform until this administration proves to me they're serious about the job they have and are going to change the behavior. And apparently they're not going to change the behavior. It's getting worse, not better. 77,000 people paroled. Once you know that Republicans believe you abused the statute, we're supposed to believe you're going to do something new if we change the law? It's not a law problem. It's an attitude problem. Thank you.
We're checking on this, Senator Graham, but do you believe the Ukrainian refugees were paroled into this country?
I believe that it should be done. You don't rewrite the law. You have asylum. You have refugee status. Refugees have to apply overseas. So if you feel like you're a refugee from a war in Ukraine, you apply for refugee status. You don't use parole. Parole was not meant to become an alternative to refugees.
We're double checking. I'm not sure, and I don't want to make an assertion that turns out to be wrong for the record, but 36,000 Ukrainian refugees have come to the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois under two conditions: a sponsoring family, and second, that they're given a work permit when they arrive. I will tell you those people have been folded into the economy of the Chicago region without incident. I don't think there's any press reporting about their presence. I think it's the right thing to do to offer people who are refugees in a war an opportunity to come to the United States. We did it after Vietnam. We've done it with our allies among the Kurds. And I don't think it's an unusual circumstance in history. So I don't think that this necessarily tells the whole story.
Well, if I may, you're talking about A and I'm talking about B. I support raising the gap for refugees. We had a meeting about it. You know, it's like 125,000. I supported raising the cap. You have to apply for refugee status overseas. And there are people, I'm sure the people you described in Ukraine were very worthy of being refugees. I'm not talking about refugees, I'm talking about parole. Parole is being used in a way the statute never contemplated. It's being abused. And here's what I don't get. After one of the people you paroled illegally, Mr. Beer, killed a young lady in Georgia, they're continuing to do the same thing. So I support refugee programs. I support asylum that's applied correctly. I don't support mass abuse of parole. And from the last time we took the vote to now, things are worse, not better. Thank you.
We've checked. They were paroled. Ukrainian refugees were paroled into the United States under the
Well,
presidency.
they violated that. They should have been refugees, not paroled. You just can't just ignore the law. I guess you can. That's why we're all going to vote no. You can and you are. So there you go.
We were voting on a bill which was characterized as a bipartisan bill. I hope it will be on the floor. So Senator Schumer wanted to be here to make an introduction, and I am going to read his statement. Unfortunately, he was called away at the last minute, and so I'm reading Senator Schumer's statement into the record.
Chair recognizes Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Senator Welch, and thank you to the nominees. And let me say at the outset, for those who are not familiar with the process, it is a long process where a lot of people investigate your life in detail. Questions are asked about things that you've long ago forgotten, and you're asked to defend things which you thought were in the obscure past, but not so when it comes to the investigators. We have had people questioned about poetry they wrote in college that betrayed the fact they were truly Marxist and have been their whole lives, and they didn't realize it. That's the sort of thing. Then they go through the investigative phase of your preparation for this moment, and the American Bar Association steps in and asks every attorney who will answer the phone or answer a phone call or request for information what you're really like and what they can say about you personally and privately. And at the end of that process, I might say that both of these nominees were found well qualified by the American Bar Association, well qualified, which meant that your adversaries who had a chance in anonymity to say what they really believed said nice things, which is a good reflection on your lives. What I found struck by as I look at both of your backgrounds, what an enormous amount of court experience you've had. That's rare in these days, at least as I'm told, as I've been removed from practice myself. Few cases end up in court, few cases end up at trial. It looks like is it Ther, did I pronounce that correctly? Tried between nearly 50 criminal cases to a jury verdict. 50 cases to a jury verdict. I hope you're getting ready to write a book about it. Tell me about that experience. What's been your biggest surprise when it comes to jury response?
Thank you, Senator. I'm such a fan of the jury system that we have. I think what surprises me the most every single time is the dedication and the drive that jurors take to really do the job well. They listen to the evidence, they listen to the judge's instruction, and they take their obligation seriously in the most serious of cases and in the most, what may seem insignificant to you and me, but is the most important to the person next to me. It is clear to those clients that the jurors have taken their job seriously. It truly is the bedrock of our justice system, Senator.
Ms. Henry, you've had similar experience representing clients at every stage of the state criminal process. Any observations, philosophical in nature?
Thank you, Senator. I agree with what my colleague said about the importance of the jury system. I think it's what makes our country unique and have the best system anywhere, I think. And I also think, what you're right, is about trying a case before a jury is not something a lot of people have an opportunity to do, especially in federal court. And I've had dozens of juries in federal court in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. So one of the things I like to do when I'm mentoring my students, my law students, is I make sure every trial I have that I allow a law student to sit and be part of that trial and to be involved in writing the openings, writing the closings, prepping the witnesses. And I feel like that's the one thing I can give them that maybe another lawyer can't give them. And they've come back to me later when they've been working at big firms and making tons of money. And they've come back and said sometimes they'll have a partner meeting and they'll say, who's tried a case in federal court? And theirs might be the only hand that gets to go up and say, it was me, I've tried a case in federal court. So I think it's unfortunately not as frequent as I'd like it to be, but it's so important. And it really is a way to see our justice system at work.
So the next thing you may have noticed in the Biden administration is women play a larger role in the selection process in this committee. Some people admire that and some resent it very much. We find it in lines of questioning which seem to have a prejudice to believe that women cannot be good prosecutors. Whether you have been or not, and both of you have defense backgrounds, what is your response to the argument that you're going to be soft on crime? Ms. Ther?
Senator, I have represented individuals who have been the victims of crime. I have seen the impact that crime can have on folks. My job right now is to, in this system, and a system that I take great pride in, is to represent those individuals. Were I to be confirmed, I would take my same commitment to the system and do that job. I would apply the appropriate law to the facts of the case before me.
Ms. Henry?
Yes, Senator, I agree with that. Not only have a lot of our clients also been victims of crime, but we sit in court all day, every day, and we listen to victims face to face. We listen to the things they say, and it is impossible not to be moved by how difficult and how enduring some of the trauma that victims of crime face. And we feel that. We see it on the front lines every day. And if I was fortunate enough to be confirmed, I would think about that and all of the experiences I've had in the criminal justice system and use that to make sure that everyone is receiving equal treatment under the law.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator Kennedy.
The Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. Today's agenda includes several nominees who have been listed for the first time and will be held over. They are Carla Campbell, U.S. Court of Appeals, 6th Circuit; Julia Lopez, U.S. Court of Appeals for the 1st Circuit; Catherine Henry, U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania; and Mary Kay Lanthier, U.S. District Court for the District of Vermont. We will vote on 9 judicial nominees today. I know members have several conflicts with other appropriations and other committees. We'll try to proceed through our agenda quickly as possible. Before I turn to Ranking Member Graham for remarks that he may have, I would like to raise a point of personal privilege. This week is not just the 75th anniversary of NATO. We also celebrate another important anniversary, Senator Lindsey Graham's birthday. Lindsey, you've been a great partner on the committee. Despite our disagreements, there have been many, many agreements. You always keep me on my toes, and I truly enjoy serving on the committee with you. A very happy birthday from all of us. I want to present you with a small birthday cake. But a large Coca-Cola.
Coke Zero, baby, Coke Zero.
Here you go, Chuck. Happy birthday to you. I say I didn't give you anything.
And now
You'll eat anything. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. And I now turn to Senator Graham for any statement he wishes to make.
Well, thank you. NATO is obviously aging better than I am, so NATO.
Nice, Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Park, and everybody for being here today. Mr. Chair, I think over the past 10 years, I have tried to strike an image of being bipartisan, to work across the aisle, and to actually solve problems here. So much so that I've even been censured in my own state, right? 30 county GOPs and a state GOP, because I feel like you cast that aside and you get things done. So my concern right now is Mr. Park, I know, is a good man. He's a smart man. My concern is on April the 17th at 6:03 p.m., we informed the White House that I had secured support among Democrats and every single Republican to block his nomination on the floor. For 2.5 months, the White House has been aware of this. And I said in the closing comments of that email, I would hate to put someone through that knowing that I have secured support on the floor to block his nomination. What is the White House thinking? Instead of spending the last 2.5 months trying to find a consensus nominee, and trust me when I tell you I have outvoted virtually anybody in this room on bipartisan nominations, I was committed to getting a bipartisan nominee. But instead, the White House chose to move forward on a nomination that I have successfully secured the votes to block on the floor. I am ashamed to be in this position, and shame on the White House for putting Mr. Park in this position. And Mr. Chair, if I can just play the video, this is what I'm going to be confronted with for the remainder of this session, or for the remainder of this hearing.
I ask you, do you want Donald Trump to be your president? We must do better, and in Hillary Clinton, we will most certainly do better.
As a progressive lawyer who wanted to make a difference, I thought that was a really unique place to be, working for a new progressive Attorney General.
Attorney General Josh Stein is one of 17 attorneys general across the country who are suing to force the Trump administration to reunite migrant families who've been separated at the U.S.-Mexico border, thousands of miles from North Carolina. There are those who say this is nothing more than a political move on your part and the other AGs because they're all Democrats.
This is a move to uphold the Constitution and fundamental American values.
I'm really more of the tip of the spear.
to try to effectuate the policy judgments and the positions that my boss, the Attorney General of North Carolina, Josh Stein, articulates and advances, and the positions that the clients take.
General Stein, what's the status of sanctuary cities in North Carolina?
There are no sanctuary cities in North Carolina.
Meanwhile, this morning, immigration outrage as a new report claims nearly 500 illegal immigrants with ICE detainers on them were released, reportedly among them people who were wanted for kidnapping, assault, arson, and murder.
And my perspective on those kinds of high-level cases are always, 2.5 million people plus voted for my boss to be Attorney General to make those kinds of decisions, and I'm feel privileged to be able to advise him.
State Attorney General Josh Stein says he will not defend the new abortion ban in court. As the state's top legal officer, he is supposed to be the defendant when state laws get challenged. However, Stein told the judge today he agrees with the challenger, Planned Parenthood.
Senator Tillis, we are, of course, going to give Mr. Park an opportunity to respond and take as much time as your video lasted to make a response to this as well. There's an issue at stake here, which is inside baseball or inside the committee, and that is the authority of any member of the United States Senate to object to a nomination that is presented. As many in this room know, blue slips are actually blue slips of paper issued by the committee as a courtesy to seek input from colleagues on nominees to their home state. During the Obama administration, then Chair Patrick Leahy honored blue slips for both circuit and district court nominees. Mr. Park is a circuit court nominee. If a senator did not return a blue slip on a nomination, that individual did not move forward. That was the practice under Senator Leahy. As a result, Senate Republicans blocked multiple circuit seats from being filled during the Obama administration. President Trump later put forward nominees for all of those seats. Senate Republicans then abandoned the Senate Judiciary tradition and held hearings on 18 circuit court nominees who had not received blue slips from home state Democrats. I objected at the time, so did many of my colleagues. We repeatedly warned Republicans they were establishing new ground rules. I've said it and I've repeated it. There cannot be one set of rules for Republican nominees and another for Democratic nominees. So I am following the same standard that Senate Republicans established during the Trump administration. Senate Republicans confirmed a nominee to the New Jersey seat on the 3rd Circuit after the Trump White House refused to let the Democratic home state senators even meet with that nominee. The 3rd Circuit nominee for a Pennsylvania seat was informed he would be nominated weeks before the Trump White House had a single conversation about the vacancy with Senator Casey. And the Trump White House counsel informed Senator Baldwin during their first conversation about a 7th Circuit Wisconsin vacancy that the White House had already selected the nominee for the seat. The White House consulted with the North Carolina senators on this vacancy far more extensively than the precedent set during the Trump administration. The White House has been discussing this seat with North Carolina senators since January. Over the course of 6 months, the White House conducted interviews and reviewed the records of all candidates that the North Carolina senators put forward. In June, Mr. Park interviewed separately, personally, with Senator Tillis and Budd before his nomination was announced. Senators Tillis and Budd may have preferred another individual for the vacancy, but the White House and the committee's practice here is consistent with the precedent set by the Republicans during the Trump administration. It is now time to begin our first panel. Mr. Park, would you please approach the table and please stand to be sworn. You'll raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the nominee has answered in the affirmative. You may proceed with an opening statement, and I will give you, of course, as I mentioned to Senator Tillis, an opportunity to respond to the video that he's shown.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chair Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and all the members of the committee. Thank you also to President Biden for the incredible honor of nominating me to this position. and to Senators Tillis and to Senator Budd for graciously taking the time to meet with me and consider my nomination. I'd like to introduce my family, starting with my wife, Uni, the rock of our family. She's an extraordinary pediatrician at UNC Health. Uni, without your love and support over the past 23 years, I never could have been here today. My daughters, Caitlin and Cora, ages 11 and 6 and 3/4, are also here. Girls, I'm sorry for ripping you away from camp to subject you to yet another morning of what you call boring law stuff. But I promise this time I won't try to force you to memorize the Constitution's preamble. I'd like to thank my own mother, who is also here. My mom first immigrated to this country 50 years ago to attend East Carolina University. She's a piano teacher. She raised 4 children, much of the time as a single working mom. My brother Stefan, a professor, is also here representing the siblings. Elisa and Christine, I'll see you back in North Carolina. I'd also like to thank the judges that I had the incredible fortune to clerk for at the beginning of my legal career. Judges Jed Rakoff and Robert Katzman, and Justices David Souter and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I cherished every moment working in the federal courts. It truly was a second legal education for me. And words cannot describe how much I wish that Judge Katzman and Justice Ginsburg could have lived to see this day. I also want to thank the many people from the North Carolina legal and law enforcement communities who have supported me throughout this process. Here today are Justices Robert Edmonds and Barbara Jackson, who both served with distinction on the North Carolina Supreme Court. Also here is Chief Henry King, President of the North Carolina Association of Chiefs of Police, Sheriff Charles Blackwood, Captain Brian Whitehurst, and Alicia Stemper from the Orange County Sheriff's Office, Major Roberto Reyes from the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, and Captain David Rose from the Winston-Salem Police Department, who is also President of the North Carolina Police Benevolent Association, and Officer Joe Woloshin, President of the Virginia PBA. It means so much that you all have come to DC to support me today. I welcome the court's, the committee's questions. I guess I'm happy to respond to the video first, if that would be appropriate.
As I mentioned to you, that was the first time I saw the video. There was a reference to a state elected official, Josh Stein. I don't know his background whatsoever and positions that he had taken. Tell me what your reaction was to this video.
Thank you, Senator. So I appreciate this opportunity. I think that if you look at those clips in context, at least the clips of me speaking, you'll see that when I was describing myself as a progressive, I wasn't using the term in the partisan or political sense. In fact, later on that same panel in the first clip, I said explicitly that I think politics through lawsuits is illegitimate. That's what I said. And what I said I think is legitimate is when attorneys general come together to protect people. That's a quote from later in the panel. And the 2 examples that I gave were both bipartisan. So the first example was the 50-state effort among Republican and Democratic attorneys general to combat the opioid crisis by bringing affirmative lawsuits against the manufacturers and distributors of the drugs that fueled the crisis. And the second example I gave in that same panel was a bipartisan effort among the attorneys general on the Atlantic coastal states to stop offshore drilling off of our coasts. Those lawsuits were filed in South Carolina, and South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson was in many ways the leader of that effort, and through his leadership, we were able to preserve our coastline from offshore drilling. And so what I meant when I said progressive litigation, I was talking about affirmative litigation that is designed to protect people. And that's consistent with my record as a whole. I'm actually pretty unique among state solicitors general in that I have never led a partisan multi-state lawsuit or partisan amicus brief where it was Democratic attorneys general on one side and Republican attorneys general on the other side. Every single effort that I've led in that context has been bipartisan. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm very grateful to have received the support from a bipartisan group of state solicitors general, including solicitors general from very conservative states such as Mississippi. Scott Stewart, who argued the Dobbs case, signed the letter in my support. And I think what these state SGs understand is that we are not policymakers. We are not elected officials. In that last clip, I think I'm pretty sure that was a clip from a Federal Society event that I did. And I think in the next sentence, I can't recall.
Excuse me, a what event?
A Federal, a Federal Society event that I was appearing on with multiple other state solicitors general from Ohio and West Virginia, and Judge Britt Grant, who was Solicitor General of Georgia. And I think in the next sentence or thereafter, I said, the people elected my boss to represent their interests as Attorney General. He makes the policy decisions. And our role as state SGs is not to make policy. My colleague in the state SG community, Andrew Brasher, who sat before this committee a couple of years ago, he said that explicitly. The elected officials are the policymakers, and the state SGs, we don't make policy. And I think the last thing I'd say is I have never declined a request to represent a state official or agency when it's been made to me. I am now currently representing numerous Republican elected officials, including the state's legislative leaders in cases. And there have been times where there is a elected official who makes a decision not to take a certain position on a lawsuit. But I have always been happy and enthusiastic to defend statutes that have been passed by the Republican-controlled General Assembly in my state and to effectuate policies made by Republican statewide officials. I guess, if I still have the floor, one last thing. So I think a good example of this is I have filed 4 cert petitions in my time as Solicitor General. 2 of those cert petitions were to defend the constitutionality of statutes that were passed by the North Carolina Republican-controlled General Assembly that my boss, Attorney General Stein, voted against when he was in the state Senate. The third was a criminal case where there was a murder in Raleigh where the conviction was vacated by the North Carolina Supreme Court. And the dissenters in that case were the sole Republican on the court at the time, Chief Justice Newby, now Chief Justice Newby, and Justice Irvin. And there was a Democratic majority that we sought cert to review that decision. And the fourth was a technical FERPA case for UNC that has no political valence. And so that is my record as Solicitor General.
Mr. Park, I've looked at the letters of support. I also note that the front row to your left is a lot of law enforcement officials, I presume from the state of North Carolina, who are here personally to support your nomination. I've never seen that before in this committee room. Often there's been an argument made that Democratic nominees are not tough on crime. For the law enforcement officials representing the organizations that are here today, tell a different story about you. I also want to make one notation here before we move on. I've never seen a letter like the one we received July the 23rd from clerks of the U.S. Supreme Court supporting your nomination. Here's what the conclusion is. Each of us believes that Ryan, Mr. Park, is eminently qualified for the position which he's nominated. We are confident that Ryan's humility, integrity, and intellectual curiosity make him an outstanding addition to the federal judiciary. We applaud his nomination, respectfully urge his prompt confirmation. There are about 30 or 40 clerks that served with you on the U.S. Supreme Court who signed this letter. I've never seen anything quite like it because these clerks represent the spectrum of the U.S. Supreme Court. They include clerks for Justice Ginsburg, Kagan, Scalia, Kennedy, Roberts, Scalia again, Chief Justice Roberts again. The list goes on, and virtually every member of the U.S. Supreme Court's personal law clerks vouch for your integrity and your ability to serve on this. That is something I've never seen before this committee. And so I have no question in my mind that you are eminently well qualified, more qualified than most nominees for the federal bench at the circuit level, and I will be supporting your nomination. Next in the order of senators is Senator Tillis.
Chair Durbin, I'd just like to go back and maybe respond to the process. The way this process played out is that the White House, we put together, Senator Budd and I would like to seek unanimous consent to put forth the letter from Senator Budd opposing
without objection
Mr. Park's nomination. We started through this process with the White House Ledge Council several months ago. We established a committee. It was a bipartisan makeup of a committee in North Carolina endorsed by 2 Republican senators, and we set forth 4 nominations. The White House responded that none of them were acceptable. In fact, they went so far to say as not only was one judge who was a 13-year Democrat, a very well-respected Democrat magistrate judge, that not only did they reject our nominees for the circuit court, but they would also not even consider some of them for a potential district court opening. Okay. They send forth a list of 4 people, up to and including the person who ran against Senator Budd in the general election. Somebody I would consider to be arguably partisan by definition. They went through a Democratic primary, they're running for the Senate, but the White House, thought that that would be somebody that's a valid list of 4 people that I should choose from. So I question the sincerity of the White House of the process. On your point about the blue slips, you know I'm in. I signed a letter to actually not vote for the filibuster, and sent it to President Trump, along with a lot of my colleagues here who ultimately recanted on that letter and voted to nuke the filibuster. If somebody wants to join me in the moral high ground on being bipartisan and consistent, welcome. But for anybody to say that somehow this process was just ivory perfect doesn't make sense to me. And what doesn't make sense to me is when the 4 nominees that we put forth were rejected out of hand, and I communicated 2.5 months ago to the White House that their 4 nominees were rejected out of hand, why are we putting this nominee through this process? I wonder whether or not, when you were seeking the support of some friends that I see in the room, whether or not they were aware that 2.5 months ago I had secured support to block this nomination. If they had, why didn't you call me? And if you didn't, why didn't they inform you? And when I have an opportunity to ask Mr. Park questions, I'm going to ask him if he's been aware for 2.5 months that he did not have support on the floor to get confirmed. And, but I'm going to reserve maybe the balance of my time and defer to my Republican colleague, Holly.
Let me ask before that happens, do you want to ask a question of the nominee?
I'm going to be here for the duration, Mr. Chair, so I can wait until the end.
Well, this is the first round, and I'm recognizing you for that purpose.
I'll wait for the second round. We'll defer to the next Democrat.
We don't have a second round scheduled. We have a second panel scheduled.
I'll take this time.
He offered it to Senator Hawley.
Well, no, let me just ask the question now. Mr. Park, have you been aware that since April the 17th, I communicated to the White House Ledge Council that it was unfortunate that my 4 nominees were rejected out of hand, and that we did not find their 4 nominees as satisfactory, and we needed to get back to work, but that I had confirmed support of my Republican colleagues and sufficient numbers of Democrats to block your nomination on the floor? Were you aware of that as early as May?
Senator, I'm not precisely sure when I was informed of that, but the White House did inform me of that at some point before we met.
Do you know whether or not, when seeking support to come to this hearing, did you communicate to those that you've asked to provide support in this hearing, were they fully informed that I had secured support to prevent your confirmation on the Senate floor?
I'm not aware of every communication that I had, Senator. I had
with
many
respect
conversations.
to communications that you have had, have you clearly communicated to those in the room who traveled from North Carolina that you did not have the support on the Senate floor for confirmation?
Senator, I can't recall every conversation, but I did understand that you made public comments relating to this, and at some point I was hoping it wasn't me, but I was informed.
Mr. Park, it wasn't a public comment. It was a formal communication to the White House at 6:03 p.m. on April the 17th. And so I guess that I'll take that as a maybe, and at some point, maybe the people that you pursued or that those who were behind you pursued did or did not know until they heard me say this in the room. I guess I will never know. But Mr. Park, understand, this is not personal. I don't take things personally. It breaks my heart to have your family members in the room to maybe hear for the first time that this is the case. But I will continue to do everything I can. should you get reported out of this committee, to block your confirmation on the floor, respectfully.
Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, as to the recent apparent attempt on President Trump's life, I do want to thank the Secret Service agents on the ground for acting quickly and responsibly. But when I heard the acting director say the system worked, I could not disagree more. It did not work. You can't have a man camped out by the golf course for 12 hours with an AK-47 and scope on it and say the system worked. We're just very fortunate he stuck the barrel through the fence before the president got to the golf hole in question. I want to applaud the Secret Service agent who saw the barrel, but this could have been a completely different story if the man had just waited, saw President Trump, then acted. The system is just broken. I don't know if it's resources. I asked the acting director before. He said they're fine. I don't buy that. Agents tell me they're working tremendous hours. I'd like to have more agents, not less. I'd like to get the Secret Service back into Treasury where they were more focused. But we'll talk about that another day. I'm just glad we didn't have a worse outcome, but I think the system is broken. As to our hearing today, on May the 2nd, 2024, all Republicans wrote a letter to Chairman Durbin. We implore you to promptly hold a Judiciary Committee hearing to confront the flagrant civil rights violations targeting Jewish students on college campuses across America and to expose the radical Islamic ideology infiltrating our universities. The goal was to have a hearing about why it's so hard to go to school if you're Jewish. And it is really hard to go to these schools if you're Jewish. You're being knocked down, you're being spat on. It is just completely out of control. This is not the hearing we're getting, so we'll work with what we've got. The House has had 10 hearings focused on anti-Semitism, on the rise like it was in the 30s, in my view. We're not talking about fringe elements within any one group or crazy people. They exist throughout society. What happened to the 6-year-old is just horrible. The man will get whatever comes his way, and to me, it's not enough. I'm trying to focus on a systematic problem. America has a systematic problem on college campuses. It is being funded, the DNI says, not by Qatar, but by Iran. So we have to deal with this. This committee should act not just in general, but specifically about what it's like to be Jewish in America in 2024. And it is not a good story. So I want to introduce into the record the original request, if I may, and also introduce in the record a letter I've got from the Union of Jewish Congregation of Americans. If I may introduce both letters, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Okay. Now, the problem is really unnerving. 2.4% of Americans are Jewish. 60% of all religious-based hate crimes have been directed against the Jewish people. There's something going on here that needs to be addressed and better dealt with, and people in charge of these universities need to be held more accountable. As to what I'm trying to do, I've been working since last April with the Biden administration to find a way to normalize between Saudi Arabia and the State of Israel. That, to me, is the answer to many problems that we face, Israel faces, and I'm a strong advocate for ending the Arab-Israeli conflict. And a beneficiary of that would be a Palestinian community better treated, not run by terrorists, with a more hopeful life and a secure Israel. Count me in for trying to end conflict. Count me in for trying to reconcile the Arab and Jewish communities in the Mideast and anywhere else. That's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about a rise throughout the world, but particularly here, against the Jewish people. examples of what you face: Columbia University and FADA, Stanford University, somebody wearing a Hamas headband, Princeton University, the Hamas material, Union Station, July the 24th. Hamas is coming. This is all over the country right now. And let me just say this. Hamas is a homicidal terrorist group dedicated not to uplifting the Palestinian people, but destroying the state of Israel. So when you write Hamas, you're either one of two things: blatantly anti-Semitic or dumb as a rock. I'll let you pick. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Everybody should condemn Hamas, not use their name routinely and hold up their cause throughout college campuses on America. So what I hope we can get started in this country is a conversation about what should be the result of attending a school and being picked upon simply because of your religion, in this case, being Jewish. The next one. One of our witnesses says, calling for the genocide of the state of Israel should not get you disciplined. It should. It should. You know, when David Duke was on colleges' campuses in his time handing out Nazi stuff, he should have been disciplined. I disagree with that. I believe in free speech, but I don't believe advocating for the killing of an entire class of people. That's not free speech. So what we have before us today as a nation is a moment of choosing. We can choose to ignore this, lump it in with every other problem we got in the country, or we can focus on it. I prefer to focus on it. I prefer to let the American Jewish community know enough is enough. We're going to be there for you. We're going to have your back. And we're not rising to the occasion. I would urge my friends on the other side, let's have a hearing focused on this problem, not lumping this problem in with every other problem we have. This is unique to the time in which we live. It is getting out of control. As to rhetoric, yeah, we can all do better. I get that. But this idea that one group is going to destroy America or one person's going to destroy America needs to come to an end. Nobody's going to destroy America. The Iranians would, if they could. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope we can follow up with another hearing focused on our original request, which is combating anti-Semitism on college campuses, making it really difficult if you're a Jewish parent to send your kid to college.
Senator Graham, you and I agree on more than we disagree. And we certainly agree that hate crimes should be treated seriously, whatever their origin, whatever their purpose. They are unacceptable in this nation of ours. Prioritizing which group is being discriminated against the worst, I don't believe is a valid exercise of our authority here. What we are trying to do is to identify a problem in America that extends beyond Jewish population to the Arab population, to the Palestinian population. All of those hate crimes are unacceptable. All of them are unacceptable. The letter which you asked me to enter into the record calls on us to pass a bill that I know of quite well, the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. That bill passed the House of Representatives. It was called by Senator Schumer in the Senate. It's a bill that I sponsored. It was stopped on the floor and filibustered by the Republican side. I don't want to draw a conclusion about their views on hatred and violence, but I think we all ought to acknowledge the fact that work needs to be done and we shouldn't tie ourselves in knots, but should work toward ending hate crimes in America. At this point, we're going to turn to the witnesses who appeared before.
To help the creepy billionaires. It is starting to look less and less like America. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. I now turn to Senator Kennedy, ranking member of the Court Subcommittee, for his opening statement. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all our panelists today.
Thanks.
With respect, I don't agree with the way our esteemed chairman has characterized this hearing today. He refers to the Trump v. U.S. opinion, a 6-3 opinion, by the way, of the United States Supreme Court, as, quote, when the president does it, that means it's not illegal, end quote. I do not believe that that is a fair reading of the opinion. And frankly, I don't understand how anyone who's read the opinion, which I reread this weekend, it's only about 90 or so pages, could reach that conclusion. I know many people look at this opinion, and it is their right. This is America. We can believe what we want. I know many people look at this opinion through the lens of former President Trump and whether they like him or dislike him. The court, in its opinion, was very careful to point out that its opinion, more than anything else, was about the institution of the presidency. The institution of the presidency. The opinion is not just about the litigants in front of the court. It's about future presidents and future Americas. That's point one. Point two. It is inaccurate to say, under Trump v. U.S., that a president of the United States has absolute immunity to do anything that he or she wants. That's just not accurate. For example, the court is very clear in saying that a president does not have criminal immunity, including but not limited to a former president, for unofficial private acts. That's clear. I don't see how anybody can argue with that. Number two, the court does say that a president, whoever that president might be, does have absolute immunity for acts performed pursuant to his or her core responsibilities. Responsibilities given exclusively to a president by virtue of the Constitution. But there's a third category, which I would suggest will include most acts by a president. Those are acts taken pursuant to a president's authority, but authority that is also shared with the United States Congress. And the court does not say that a president cannot be prosecuted criminally for those acts. It does not. It does say that if a prosecutor, the prosecution, if it wants to prosecute a former president for that layer or category of acts, the burden of proof is on the prosecutor. Well, duh, the burden of proof is always on the prosecutor. You can call it presumptive immunity, but the burden of proof is always on the state. And the state has to prove that the president's prosecution for that middle layer of acts would not impinge, I think the words would pose no, quote, no danger of intrusion on the authority and function of the executive branch. Now that's hardly absolute immunity. And I'm looking forward to our panel today to enlighten us on this subject. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Kennedy. Today we welcome 5 witnesses. Our first witness is Philip Lacavara, who formerly served as Deputy Solicitor General of the United States for criminal and national security cases.